In the dim chambers of the Palace of Whitehall, a secret was kept under layers of silk and shadow long before it was whispered aloud in the bustling streets of London. Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen who had ruled England with a blend of iron will and enchanting grace for nearly half a century, was being dressed not for life, but for death. Before the nation had been told, before the courtiers had been summoned, her attendants prepared her body with the reverence and ritual usually reserved for the departed. Her garments were selected, the finest gowns and delicate lace arranged meticulously. Her pale hands were folded, her face bathed in soft light, an eerie calm settling over her chamber. This premature preparation was not an act of superstition, but of political necessity, a choreographed ritual to control a narrative as fragile as the Queen's own failing health. The image of a living monarch dressed in death's clothes raises profound questions. What does it mean to hold a queen's body in such careful custody before the final breath? How does the state manage the transition from sovereign to symbol? Elizabeth's dressing before death was an assertion of control over not only her body, but the kingdom's future. It was a performance staged behind closed doors, reflecting the intense anxiety that gripped the Tudor court as it faced the end of an era. The Queen, who had mastered spectacle in life, was now subjected to it in death, her very body a political instrument wielded by those who understood the power of image as well as any monarch. This moment invites us to confront the paradox of sovereignty, that the monarch's death, far from being a private affair, is a public event managed and manipulated with calculated precision. Elizabeth's dying body was not simply a vessel to be mourned, it was a stage for continuity, legitimacy, and control. Before the news spread, before the world knew she was gone, Elizabeth's corpse was already performing its final act. Elizabeth Tudor was born into a world fraught with danger and divided loyalties. Daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, her early years were shaped by the volatile political and religious upheavals of the English Reformation. Cast out from favour following her mother's execution, Elizabeth's legitimacy was questioned and her survival precarious. Yet, through wit, education, and unyielding resolve, she ascended from this fractured beginning to become one of England's most formidable monarchs. Her reign, spanning over 4 decades, was defined by a delicate balancing act. She navigated threats from foreign powers, notably Spain and France, while containing internal religious divisions between Catholics and Protestants. Elizabeth's mastery of court politics, her cultivated image as the Virgin Queen, and her use of pageantry and symbolism reinforced her authority in a time when female sovereignty was often challenged or dismissed. Elizabeth's understanding of the power of image extended beyond her public appearances. It permeated the governance of the realm. She carefully crafted narratives to solidify her legitimacy, managing threats with a combination of diplomacy and ruthlessness. Her reign was not merely political, but theatrical, with every gesture and word designed to project control and stability. As she aged, however, the question of succession loomed ominously. Without an heir, Elizabeth's death threatened to unravel the delicate fabric she had woven. Court factions whispered and maneuvered, each seeking favor in the uncertain future. The Queen's health became a matter of state concern, yet information was tightly controlled. The spectacle of Elizabeth's reign, which had been so carefully constructed, now extended to her decline, with her body becoming a symbol not only of power, but of imminent change. As Elizabeth entered the twilight of her life, the once vibrant monarch who had commanded the attention of Europe was shadowed by declining health and the heavy weight of looming uncertainty. Whispers of illness permeated the corridors of Whitehall, fueling anxiety among courtiers and commoners alike. Though Elizabeth maintained a public facade of strength and vitality, those closest to her observed signs of frailty, periodic bouts of exhaustion, pallor and pain that betrayed the Queen's waning physical resilience. The exact nature of Elizabeth's ailments remains a matter of historical debate. Some accounts suggest she suffered from cancer, possibly ovarian or uterine, while others propose stroke or a combination of chronic conditions exacerbated by the stresses of rulership. Medical understanding at the time was rudimentary at best, but the Queen's symptoms, severe abdominal pain, weight loss and weakness, suggest a prolonged and agonizing decline. The atmosphere at court during these final years was charged with unease and political maneuvering. Factions jockeyed for position, aware that the question of succession was the kingdom's most pressing crisis. The lack of a direct heir created a vacuum of power, encouraging secretive alliances and subtle intrigues aimed at influencing the future monarch's identity. Robert Cecil, Elizabeth's trusted advisor, worked diligently behind the scenes to prepare for a smooth transition to James VI of Scotland, whose claim to the English throne promised the unification of crowns but threatened to unsettle the English nobility. Secrecy surrounded Elizabeth's condition. News of her illness was tightly controlled to prevent panic or rebellion. The Queen herself remained silent on the matter, choosing to project dignity and resolve even as her body betrayed her. This veil of silence contributed to an atmosphere of speculation and fear, with courtiers and foreign diplomats alike guessing at the timing and manner of her death. Amid this tension, preparations began, both practical and symbolic, to manage the inevitable moment when Elizabeth would cease to be England's reigning monarch. In the shadowed chambers of Whitehall, where the walls whispered the secrets of monarchs past, preparations were underway not for a queen's living presence, but for her death's public unveiling. Elizabeth I's condition had deteriorated to a point where courtiers and servants moved with furtive urgency, executing rituals usually reserved for the deceased. Dressing, embalming, and staging the body before death was officially declared. This premature choreography of death was a calculated act of political theatre, designed to control the narrative of transition and assert continuity amid the fragile uncertainty of succession. The Queen's body, though still warm and breathing, was tended to with reverence and precision. Her garments, rich with the symbols of her reign, the pearls signifying purity, the velvet embroidered with Tudor roses, were arranged meticulously. The delicate lace, the heavy brocades, the jeweled accessories, all were positioned to convey strength, dignity, and timeless authority. This was not a macabre vanity, but a state necessity. The image of the Queen could not be left to chance or rumor. Her physical presence, even in decline, was a vessel of political symbolism to reassure a kingdom on the brink of change. This ritual reflected the Tudor obsession with order, spectacle, and control over death's unsettling unpredictability. By dressing Elizabeth's corpse in life's finery before the public announcement of her passing, the court sought to contain grief and prevent chaos. It was a visual promise that the monarchy would endure, that the sovereign's authority was eternal and unbroken, even as the woman behind the crown slipped away. The practice also speaks to deeper cultural beliefs about the body and sovereignty. The monarch's body was not private property, but a public symbol, its image inseparable from the state's legitimacy. Preparing the Queen's corpse in advance was a way to command even death, framing it as a continuation of reign rather than its cessation. The boundary between life and death blurred into a staged passage, with the Queen's body as the last performance. Behind the scenes of Elizabeth's final days, a ruthless and meticulous political game was unfolding. The Queen's frailty was an open secret among the court's power players, and the question of succession had become the paramount concern. Robert Cecil, her trusted Secretary of State and Master of the Court, orchestrated a delicate balancing act, positioning James VI of Scotland as the inevitable heir while managing factional tensions within England. Cecil's work was a study in subtlety. Whispers, promises, and carefully leaked information controlled the flow of power like a masterful puppeteer. The political stakes were immense. Elizabeth's failure to produce an heir had left a vacuum that threatened to unravel decades of religious and political reform. Scotland's James VI, grandson of Henry VIII's sister Margaret, represented continuity, but also uncertainty, a foreign monarch whose ascendancy could shift England's alliances and destabilize its nobility. Factions at court jockeyed for influence, some advocating for more radical Protestant successors, others fearing the implications of a Scottish union. As Elizabeth's health declined, information was tightly managed. Public appearances were curtailed, official statements carefully crafted, and the Queen's attendants sworn to silence. The court moved quickly to prepare for the transfer of power, staging events and appearances designed to smooth the transition and quell unrest. This behind-the-scenes maneuvering underscored the precariousness of Tudor rule and the lengths to which those in power would go to preserve stability. In this atmosphere of uncertainty, Elizabeth's death became not merely a personal tragedy, but a political event, a spectacle to be choreographed and controlled. The management of her image in death was as crucial as her rule in life. By preparing her body and controlling the narrative, Cecil and his allies sought to present a seamless passage from one monarch to the next, preserving the illusion of unbroken sovereignty, even amid deep political fractures. The moment came when the carefully guarded secret could no longer be contained. The death of Queen Elizabeth I had to be announced. The declaration was not simply a factual report, but a highly orchestrated spectacle designed to shape public perception and ensure political stability. Courtiers, heralds, and officials performed their roles with precision, delivering the news with measured solemnity and ritual gravity befitting a monarch who had ruled for over 4 decades. The public reaction was a complex tapestry of mourning, uncertainty, and anticipation. For many, Elizabeth had been the enduring symbol of England's resilience and identity, a monarch who had steered the nation through religious upheaval, foreign threats, and internal conspiracies. Her death left a void filled with anxiety about the future, streets filled with crowds that both grieved and speculated, watching as the machinery of state shifted gears toward a new era. The announcement itself was layered with political messaging. It emphasized continuity and the legitimacy of the succession, reassuring the populace that the crown would pass to James VI of Scotland, thus uniting 2 kingdoms under a single sovereign. The state-controlled narrative sought to frame Elizabeth's death as the peaceful conclusion to a glorious reign and the beginning of a hopeful new chapter. Yet, beneath the surface, the spectacle masked deeper tensions and unresolved conflicts. Elizabeth's death was not simply the end of a life, but the closing of an epoch marked by contradictions between faith and politics, femininity and authority, myth and reality. The announcement was the opening act of a national drama that would unfold over decades, shaping English history and identity in profound ways. Elizabeth's funeral was a meticulously crafted ceremony that fused religious ritual with political theatre, designed to enshrine her legacy and legitimize the nascent Stuart succession. The grand procession wove through the streets of London, attended by nobility, clergy, and thousands of subjects, all bearing witness to the final rites of a monarch who had become larger than life. Every element, from the richly embroidered pall to the choice of hymns, was imbued with symbolism, reflecting the Virgin Queen's cultivated image as England's eternal ruler. The iconography was deliberate and layered. Elizabeth was portrayed as a martyr queen, a symbolic virgin who had sacrificed personal happiness for the good of her nation. The imagery invoked divine right and sanctity, aligning her death with spiritual transcendence. Statues, effigies, and portraits that adorned the ceremony reinforced this narrative, carefully distancing the Queen from the frailty of human mortality and casting her instead as a timeless figure of strength and purity. Political messages were woven through the ceremony's fabric. The funeral affirmed the peaceful transfer of power to James VI of Scotland, presenting unity as the crown's paramount value. It also served as a balm for a kingdom bruised by decades of religious conflict and political intrigue, offering a moment of collective mourning and national identity consolidation. Yet beneath the pageantry lay the tension of unresolved histories. The funeral was as much about managing memory as honoring the dead. It negotiated between reality and myth, crafting a legacy that would shape English self-understanding for generations, even as it obscured the complexities and contradictions of Elizabeth's reign. Elizabeth I's legacy is inseparable from the carefully constructed myth of the Virgin Queen, a symbol of purity, strength, and national identity that has endured for centuries. This image, cultivated through portraits, speeches, and public ceremonies, transformed her from a mortal monarch into an almost divine figure whose reign represented the golden age of England. The myth served both to elevate Elizabeth above her contemporaries and to provide a unifying symbol for a kingdom fractured by religious and political strife. However, the reality of Elizabeth's life and reign was far more complex. Behind the carefully painted portraits and eloquent speeches lay a woman who navigated immense pressures, personal sacrifices, and constant threats. The myth glosses over the political ruthlessness, the betrayals, and the fears that shaped her decisions and defined her rule. It also obscures the contradictions inherent in her refusal to marry or produce an heir, choices that both empowered and constrained her legacy. Posthumously, the myth of the Virgin Queen became a powerful cultural and political tool. It was invoked to inspire patriotism, justify political authority, and promote a narrative of English exceptionalism. Artists, writers, and historians contributed to this legacy, shaping Elizabeth's story into a timeless archetype of female sovereignty and national pride. Yet the myth also raises questions about historical memory and the ways in which narratives are constructed to serve present needs. Elizabeth's life reminds us that legacy is not fixed, but contested, shaped by those who tell the story and those who remember. Elizabeth I's body, even in death, served as a potent symbol wielded by the state to project power, continuity, and legitimacy. The rituals surrounding her final days, the preemptive dressing of her corpse, and the elaborate funeral all demonstrate how the monarch's physical presence transcended biology to become a political instrument. The body was a canvas upon which narratives of sovereignty, purity, and divine right were inscribed, reinforcing the monarchy's claim to unbroken authority despite the uncertainties of succession. This ritualization of death reflects a broader pattern in monarchical politics, where the sovereign's body is never truly private, but a public asset to be managed, displayed, and interpreted. Elizabeth's physical decline was carefully concealed, her death meticulously choreographed. Such control over the monarch's body underscores the intersection of politics, gender, and spectacle, revealing how power demands not only obedience in life but compliance in death. The symbolic use of Elizabeth's body also exposes the tensions inherent in monarchy, a system reliant on the embodiment of state authority in a single figure, yet vulnerable to the fragility and mortality of human flesh. The rituals surrounding death serve both to mask this vulnerability and to assert transcendence over it, crafting an image of eternal sovereignty. Elizabeth's story invites reflection on the human costs of such spectacle, the pressure to perform loyalty and dignity, the erasure of personal suffering beneath public expectation, and the ways in which bodies become sites of political struggle. Her legacy challenges us to consider how history remembers rulers, not only through their actions, but through the ways their deaths are staged and remembered. Elizabeth I's death, dressed and displayed before the world knew she had breathed her last, is a stark reminder of how power clings not only to life, but to death. The ritual surrounding her final moments speaks to the profound intersection of mortality and monarchy, where the body is both a symbol and a vessel, carefully managed to preserve authority even as it fades. Her story reveals the tension between human vulnerability and political necessity, between personal decline and public spectacle. The image of a queen prepared for death before her death was announced forces us to confront the paradox of sovereignty, that control must extend beyond life's final breath, shaping memory and legacy to secure political continuity. It challenges modern viewers to reflect on how leadership and mortality intertwine, how history is crafted as much by the staging of death as by the acts of life. In honoring Elizabeth's story, we also acknowledge the hidden costs, the sacrifices and silences endured by those who wear crowns. We remember that behind every public image lies a complex human reality, often marked by fear, isolation, and the weight of expectation. If you want to hear more stories they tried to bury, subscribe. We don't just remember, we reveal.